Hi all, and welcome back to another episode of the ICIS Energy Foresight podcast. Today, I have a special guest with me, Andrei Marcu, which is going to help me understand a bit more the policy angle and what's coming out of Brussels. There's something quite new and meaty that happened just recently. On the 2nd of July, the European Commission put forward two key documents for the long term of the European Union. The communication on the delivery of the Clean Industrial Deal and the proposal on the 2040 climate target. Both documents have long-term implications, but in the Commission's mind, obviously, they will start having an impact already in the near term. In this podcast, we usually tend to look at geopolitical and policy events with a market lens. But yeah, today Andrei is going to help me add a policy lens and trying to obviously disentangle these two documents a bit more. Andrei is the founder and executive director of the European Roundtable for Climate Change and Sustainable Transition, which is an independent think tank based in Brussels. Welcome, Andrei.
Thank you for having me, Matteo. Good to see you again.
Before we dive into it, can you tell us a bit more what your think tank does and what you do? And because I really appreciate that, we've been known each other for long, and you have probably one of the most sensitive approach and best approach from my point of view in terms of being very rigorously intellectually and critical in terms of the policy angle. So can you tell us a bit more?
Well, we're a simple, honest to God think tank based in Brussels. We do European and global climate change policy about a 75-25 split, 75 European, 25 global. Our main focus around economic instruments. We started with the emission trading system, but then we build a whole suite of other topics around that, around things that are relatively close to carbon pricing. So things like carbon border adjustment mechanism, CRCF, the carbon capture and storage, direct air capture, things of that sort, hydrogen. So these are all things that we get involved in. Globally, we get involved into issues like Article 6 that we've been involved for the last over 10 years, since before the Paris Agreement, and also something that is closely related to trade and climate, therefore CBAM is called response measure, which is a place where in the UNFCCC framework you deal with issues of impact of climate change policies, cross-border impact of climate change policies. Therefore, CBAM is kind of a normal target for discussion in these issues.
A lot of acronyms in there and a lot of layers of regulation that can be associated with different acronyms, and we're probably going to touch upon some of those today. And I want obviously your take on a few of these elements that are part of the new proposal. As you brilliantly articulated in your note last week that analyzed the new proposal, I think there is an element of how we try to navigate these layers of regulation with the idea of the commission. The new commission has been quite prolific in terms of new policies, considering that one of the main aim of this new mandate is to simplify and reduce complexity. But yeah, life is a paradox, so we shouldn't be surprised about that. But if we start from the general, Andrei, and try to look at the new proposal and the new 2040 target, what's your main take? And are you surprised? Are there any surprising elements?
There's no real surprise. I mean, this has been one way or another within the echoes that we hear in Brussels. I mean, This is what happens in echo chambers such as Washington, Ottawa, Brussels, Canberra. People listen to this, story builds up slowly, slowly. In the end, there's very little. I mean, President Trump would throw at you once in a while a surprise. But in general, this is what came out, is what was being expected broadly. The 90% by 2040 was something that had been recommended in a previous commission communique, was in the scientific advisory board. So the number is not a surprise. The 3% by 2036 of the accept of international credits in meeting this target was also mentioned in there. The fact that direct air capture was also mentioned as a possible flexibility. These are all factors that had been included in there. So there really is no big surprise. I think the surprises may come now. We do hear echoes that in various places, such as in Poland, there seems to be, for instance, a almost unanimous across political spectrum opposition and rejection of this as being unrealistic. Other countries obviously are, and other stakeholders are very positive and very bullish on this. So there's really not a surprise. I think the surprise, if there is a surprise, I mean, even though that is not a surprise, but it's still something that it's a problem, is the fact that we all expect to do this by September. And again, it's not a surprise because there is a deadline of having also an associated nationally determined contribution, the commitment that the EU is going to make towards the Paris Agreement that needs to be presented at COP30 in Belém in November. So you have to have that a little bit in advance. But nevertheless, again, the direction of travel, nobody argues with the direction of travel, but the speed in which you want to make a decision on something that has incredible implications for not European industry, European society in general, is surprising. And again, I wish that we would not go through this situation where we passed the European Green Deal and a Fit for 55 in the middle of COVID with little debate, to be blunt. And now we go to 2040, 90% over summer. That is not unsurprising. Not unsurprising. Let's put it this way.
The market seems to be somehow on your side because if we look at the reaction, then they basically snubbed the document, which to a certain extent, from an economic perspective, policy is exactly what the reaction you want. But it's something we are not used, because usually even the European Commission is somehow used to get the market reacting to either the upside or the downside whenever something comes out of Brussels. And in your view, is this because everything was already cooked, if we want to use that term? Is it because there is not real tangible impact in the short term, or just simply because targets started to lose relevance since they are far too distant in the future? What's your take on these?
Well, I'm trying to go back to my days in the trade. I was never a trader, but I was a policy person working for a trading house. And I'm trying to go back to those days and remember what the guys that owned the company, the bosses, would come and discuss around the desk was the carbon trading desk. And I think there could be a number of reactions. One of them is this has been bandied a lot over the last 6 months. So everybody's heard this. Probably maybe somebody who's the head or the owner of one of these trading firms is probably still under his radar. But the second thing would probably be that it hasn't been translated in what it means for ETS exactly. I mean, there's no ETS number. We know that 90%, but what does that mean exactly in terms of ETS number? That has not been broadly discussed. I mean, there's been analysis probably, but there hasn't been a clear discussion saying in terms of ETS, this is what you have to do. Third thing is probably some lack of, some incredibility. People simply have difficulty believing that you're actually going to do 90, that you're not going to have any 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 allowances by 2039 or 2040 something. People simply have some difficulty swallowing that and believing that this to be true. So there's a combination of things. But first and foremost for me, I think it hasn't been translated into a specific number for ETS. The fact that there are no allowances by 2039 is something that is in general being said in conversation in these panels. The Commission continues to say that that is not true, that this is more like 2040 something. But it's not, I don't think it hit the reality button yet.
And this is another interesting element, right? Because if we drill down into some of the key aspects, I think correct me if I'm wrong here, but the only direct reference to the ETS is the fact that international credits, which is probably the new element of that proposal compared to the original impact assessment. So the opening the international credits, there is a provision which basically states that they won't be traded within the ETS. So how do you see this? This is definitely an opening to Article 6, which is something that one of the major experts in globally. But how is this gonna effectively impact the whole market?
It is quite clear that they went at pains to the authors, the Commission went at pains to make sure that it's clear that the intention is not to be used for compliance as a compliance instrument in the emission trading system. I think that is quite clearly a reaction. We went through this, Matteo. I mean, as ERCST, we had there's a process that we have in place, and we have in place. We'll continue to discuss the integration of international credits, Article 6 credits in the EU climate change framework. And we started by imagining that it will come in the ETS, and we got a very strong pushback. And as a result of this pushback, it sounded to me like the European institution, the people that actually the hands on the policy buttons, kind of decided that, well, listen, we would like to get this and get some flexibility, but to put it in the ETS, you already kind of raising heck with the civil society, with the NGOs, the purest of the world. And as such, if you're on the offering, was softened to make sure that it is not going to affect the ETS and carbon prices, but it's going to be used for in general EU compliance with its commitment and the Paris Agreement at 90%, but also possibly by member states, because each member state is going to have to do something, and member states could be using this for their own compliance. But they went a long pains to make sure that it's clear there's no intention of disturbing the carbon price of the ETS. There's another explanation for this also, Matteo, is the fact that if you use international credits, what you do, I mean, the only logic that you use international credit is that at some point you have a cheaper compliant instrument. That's the logic. And this is, in any market that you go, you try to minimize your cost. And that's the purpose of the exercise. Markets deliver cost efficient. Well, in this case, we're actually looking for a high price. I mean, go figure this one out. So, it's not that we're trying to minimize the cost to European industry. We're trying to make sure that the price is as high as possible. And as such, kind of this, it obviously clashes. These two concepts clash, and probably they cannot reconcile it at this point, and it is not the moment to reconcile it. A second shoe may drop later, as the same way the discussion has always been that if you talked about international credit in the EU, the answer came, can't you read the climate law? And well, lo and behold, well, the climate law is still there, but we're changing it, or the proposal is to change it. So once you change something, will there be a second layer of change sometime later on? Possible.
Which is, I mean, this is a great assist for the next point I wanted to discuss, which is effectively what has just happened with the CBAM, the carbon border adjustment measure, which is the other element, obviously, that is highly impactful for European industry, but I wouldn't say just European industry. The Commission simplified just recently the initial regulation with the Omnibus One package. The funny anecdote there that they simplified the original document that was a 53-page document with a 67-page document. But again, how is this? I mean, is this gonna impact the overall industry? There are a lot of elements that are still missing, and you analyze that in both in your note and in another report. And what are the main open points that we still need to address going forward? There's the export element, but it's how you use revenue, but that's not just that, right?
Well, can I make a roundabout for a second here, because this is important. This is about the competitiveness and of European economy and industry. And the chairman of JP Morgan, I said it before, but I'm not being the chairman of JP Morgan. I wasn't quoted. Basically makes the case that we were, I think, 90% GDP not long ago, 20 years ago, and now we're at 60% GDP or somewhere thereabouts. So that obviously you're in a crisis of economic proportion in Europe. People may not like to accept it, but that's what we are. And CBAM is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, is something that is put in place in order to try to protect European industry from cost arising of climate change policy. Now, climate change policy is one cost, but there are a lot of other costs, and many of them of regulatory nature, and if not of energy nature, which is another significant, probably the most significant impact. But this is a intellectually and practically is something that Europe had to do. Other than that, we commit suicide, or we go by the book of those that argue that we should deindustrialize in order to, because we're not. I mean, what is the point of being competitive? We're not competitive in energy intensive industry, so why try? Well, I have news for them. I mean, even the Marxists understood that you have to have heavy industry in order to be. And if the Marxists understood that, then this guy should also understand that. So to make sure that you continue to be competitive, you have to protect your industry. Whether it's in line with the Paris Agreement or not, that's a different story. But you have to do this. But in theory, it's a great story. The devil is always in the details. So when you start looking at it, because we have a very good team, and I'm kind of writing a commercial. We have a world-class team. We looked at this for the last 6 years, and we're super enthusiastic about this and interesting. And we think that for people at DG Taxud and the people that wrote this stuff in the commission, I think they've done a very good job trying to consult, trying to talk to people, etc., etc. But there are certain, a point where a force moves a immovable object, and there are a number of things that are simply different to square. One of them is the issue of exports. And, there are installations, there are industry in Europe who depend for a significant amount of their production of exports. If you eliminate that, they become non-viable. Now, if you have to pay a tax or a price and have a cost internalized on carbon pricing in Europe, when you export it, if you don't get your money back, like in a VAT, then you go and compete on the world market with people that don't have that cost. So you have to find a solution. That solution has not been found, is being proposed now in the form of a compensation, monetary compensation. It's a solution. It's something that will be discussed, but it wasn't our preferred solution, but something that will be discussed. And I think we're open-minded. We'll listen to more detail. Right now, it's fairly high level. We don't fully understand how it is. We had hoped that the money from CBAM would be used to go to developing countries, and the money could have come from ETS. But again, it's a debate that is going on. The second one is circumvention, and meaning, as we have found out in the marginal line, offense is a lot better than defense, usually. People will always find ways or try to find ways around any constraint. And in this case, basically you say, well, I gotta pay. What is this carbon border adjustment mechanism? Is a law that says that people that import in the EU are going to have to pay the same price for carbon as what the producers in the EU pay. So if you're an Indian producer and you have 5 tons of CO2 in your product, then you're going to have to pay the same price that the EU producer pays. Now, there's a million ways around this, and the simplest way is the aluminum producers basically tell you, which I have to take them at their word. There's enough clean aluminum in China, meaning aluminum that's being produced based on hydro energy or clean energy, that you can feed the whole European demand, which means zero border adjustment tax. All of a sudden, the European producers say, wait a second, guys, this doesn't work for us. This is circumvention. Now, is it circumvention? By the book, it's not. On the other hand, it defeats the purpose of the exercise, because you are sending clean products to Europe and either using in your country products that have carbon intensity or sending it to somewhere else. So, and even if that is the case, you're also averaging over a large amount of quantity, so your overall price goes down, so you're still more competitive. So there's a million ways around this, and this hasn't been addressed yet. It's an issue that hasn't been solved anywhere. The only other place where we know or a border adjustment mechanism is in electricity in California. In that case, basically, there's no solution. People say, we recognize it and we see it and we deal with it, but there's no real solution. So how this will be dealt with and how rapid the measures that are going to be put in place to address it is something that is yet to be told. But obviously, the answer you get from people that are covered by CBAM, or those that are on the books of potentially being covered in the next round of inclusion, is, yes, we like it, but you guys solve these problems first. And that is, like my son used to say, yes, I want to eat spinach, but not right now.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. I always refer back to the fact that there are macro problems and micro problems, and macro solutions generally don't fit for micro problems, especially when when you're in the realm of economics and industrial policies, and it's always challenging, obviously, because you're trying to create a general framework which then applies to a lot of micro situations, micro problems, and markets. They, as you correctly say, they always try to optimize for the lowest cost and the best solution for their own. Andrei, thanks a lot for this. It's been very insightful and very enjoyable, and I hope that you have nice holiday, and I hope to do this once again in the future. To the next update, process is, as you said, is able to produce a lot of interesting elements of discussion. And thanks again.
Thank you, Matteo. Thanks for having me today.
And again, we'll see you to the next one. Good summer all.
Thank you.